Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Capes and Lunatics. It's just me, Phil, this time, but I have a special guest with me. You, he's working on the Punisher right now. You probably know him from Savage Avengers, Moon Knight, City of the Dead. I've looked at this man's resume. I was scrolling for a while. So yes, it's Mr. David Pepose. Is that it? Pepose?
Pepose. But
Pepose.
what,
Yeah.
I've heard every permutation of it.
I'm
Thank you
horrible
so
with
much.
last names, so it's
No. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here, and excited to talk comics with you guys tonight.
yes, thank you. First of all, I just wanted to say thank you for Savage Avengers, just because I enjoyed it, but one of our co-hosts, who unfortunately he passed away in June, we loved covering Savage Avengers. Anytime the Savage Avengers issue was out, Charlie, his name was Charlie. He loved anything Avengers, but he loved anything Conan. He was just so that book was he loved it. Anytime it came out, he was like, "We're gonna talk about that. We're gonna talk about that." Right? And I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, I got it. Yeah, we're gonna talk it. Yeah." So how
Yeah.
so how I mean, how fun was that? Just doing Avengers and Conan, and you threw in curve like Punisher 2099 and
It was a dream book. I loved my time on Savage Avengers. It was my first assignment at Marvel. I couldn't have asked for a better first assignment. I loved working with Carlos Magno on that book. My editor Tom Brevoort. That was the first project I worked with him on, and I'd have written that book for 100 issues if the market could sustain it. Just a really fun cast, a really fun book, and as somebody who's grown up a Marvel fan for as long as I can remember. It really was my love letter to the Marvel universe, and seeing how many people responded to that book, it really meant the world to me. And it was a dream come true. So thank you so much for the kind words and for taking the time to talk about the book. It's really that is the best kind of response, I think, is seeing people respond to the enthusiasm I'm putting on the page, and matching it with their own enthusiasm. It really is the best feeling in the world.
and it's a badge of honor. Again, I mean, how many Marvel writers can say, "Oh, I wrote Conan"?
Yeah, I was the last one, and
Oh,
that was a huge honor and responsibility and undertaking all on its own. I'm so proud of how we stuck the landing, and really wrapped up Conan's story with a nice little bow. And it really it was a big moment in history, I think, for the Marvel universe, and I think for Marvel publishing in terms of their licensing. And it was a responsibility we didn't want to take lightly, and I'm very thrilled with how it all came together.
nice. Again, yeah, it was a great book. Like I said, we enjoyed it here. So, um, but yeah, I was like looking at your website and everything. So, all right, before we get to the other comics, so you used to be a crime reporter.
Yeah, I covered crime and state politics for the Berkshire Eagle in Pittsfield, Massachusetts.
Oh,
That was my first job out of college.
hmm.
I had interned at newsrooms all around the country, um, uh, uh, Boston area, Washington D.C., Los Angeles, and Pittsfield is a great experience. It really kind of taught me all the skills I needed to know to write comics. You can't be afraid of a deadline. You can't be afraid of a blank page. You have to be resourceful and putting your stories together, and really finding out where can you find the stories. And so it even kind of taught me how to write modularly. The same way that I would know how to kind of shift around a paragraph to make the structure of an article flow better. I do that with my scripts all the time. Sometimes I'll have a scene that I like it, but it's either running too long, or it's coming too early, or it's coming too late. And so I lop off the beginning, I lop off the end, I kind of shift it somewhere else, and then I rebuild that connective tissue. So it was a wonderful experience, and I still keep in touch with many of the people that I worked with over there. Just a great group of people.
Oh, nice. I mean, did you ever cover like a real world story that you later used it in a comic, or again, you'd have to change some things around, maybe add a super villain or
Yeah.
two, but it's just
Um, well, thankfully, I didn't have to deal with like any sort of Infinity Stone issues or anything in real message. Yeah, I mean, for me, it was especially with the crime beat. It was covering the night shift, so it was speaking with every single police department every single night and saying, was there anything going on? So there's certainly gang crime, gang violence, and in addition to accidents and weather related things going on
Mm.
in rural Massachusetts. Um, you know, and so yeah, it was. I can't say that there's anything that I plucked from that in my comics career. Although I suppose that kind of experience it certainly helped me gravitate towards the first genre that I started in comics. I did start. My first book was a crime book. Actually, my first three books were crime books, and I do think that was a really helpful experience for me in that I've actually used a lot in my Marvel work, which is it's so easy to lean on the powers of it all and to lean on the continuity of it all. But my crime books, these were ordinary flesh and blood people. They did not have repulsor blasts or $1 billion armor to lean back on. It was really just kind of their wit and their grit, and their own kind of neuroses to work through. So yeah, I think maybe that the scale and the stakes of it all, keeping things a little more street level, has really kind of reinforced how do you build up a character, and how do you really kind of key in on their emotional state and their character arc. And I think that's something that really helps reinforce all the really cool spectacle and superpowers that go hand in hand with the Marvel universe.
And if they ever come out with some series that focus like the main character is a reporter, you can be like, oh, I've been there. I go first
Yeah,
hand experience.
yeah, absolutely. I would love to write a comic book reporter any day of the week. So yes, Marvel DC, if you're listening, give me a call. I'll make it happen.
I mean, you probably come at a different angle than a lot of people come at Superman. Be like, hey, I've reported.
Yeah, I'm a reporter who grew up in the Midwest, so yeah, I probably would have a little bit in common with Clark.
There you go.
Um, yeah, fun character. I would definitely, I'd write him in a heartbeat.
Oh, nice. All right. Okay. Now, all right. Let's switch to another one I thoroughly enjoyed. Moon Knight: City of the Dead, the 5-issue series.
Thank you.
Really good. Again, it's like the main book, Jed McKay doing a good job, and I thought this like kind of like fit in perfectly, with his run. It was like, sometimes if someone's doing a second book, you might be like, it's a little different than what the main guy's doing. But no, I thought this fit into the time frame perfectly.
Yeah, it was a really fun experience. I've wanted to write Moon Knight for ages. Even my first book, Spencer and Locke, I remember when that came out, people were saying, "Oh, he should write Moon Knight after that," which is a huge compliment coming off of my first book. And so Moon Knight, I'd wanted to tackle for a while. He almost made the cut of Savage Avengers. I
Oh,
had to cut a couple characters short. And ironically, the two characters that I wound up having to cut, I had to cut Moon Knight, and I had pitched several iterations of Punisher. Uh,
oh,
I wound up revisiting those afterwards. Um, so yeah, I did Moon Knight, Black, White, and Blood. I did a story in that anthology. My editor Tom Brevoort had heard me when I said, "Oh, I really wanted to do something with Moon Knight," and I agonized over cutting him. And I did a story with Leonardo Romero called A Hard Day's Night. It was sort of the hangover with Moon Knight, with Mark talking with all of his alters, figuring out like who who got what wound inflicted.
oh, I do remember that. Yes, yes.
And that was I think pretty well received. And so later that I guess that following summer, Tom emailed me and said, "Hey, listen, we're doing Moon Knight's big right now. Between the Disney Plus show and Jed McKay's run, we're looking to do more Moon Knight related content. And if you had a 5-issue miniseries, do you have any ideas?" And I was so thrilled. I've wanted to do something that really focuses on Moon Knight as a character. Has always struck me as like the ultimate unreliable narrator. There's been so
Yeah.
much said about his mental state and the way that his perception of the world winds up influencing the way that he approaches crime fighting.
Mm.
In terms of his alters and the way that kind of goes hand in hand with the Egyptian supernatural of it all. So I really wanted to do something in that vein, sort of like Inception, being able to really kind of weaponize that perception a bit. And the other thing was I finished watching the Disney Plus show. I
Mm,
loved the character of Scarlet Scarab. Layla
yes.
El Fawley was just a wonderful addition to the mythos. And so the first thing I said was, could we add Layla to the mix? And Tom was like, yeah, that sounds like a pretty good value add to me. And what was funny is a few months later, as Jed was starting work on Moon Knight 25, he actually had a similar idea where he's like, oh, could we throw in, we've got this exercise issue. Maybe we'll introduce Layla into the mix. And so we were actually able to dovetail our stories together really nicely, where Jed was sort of able to tee up the events in my story. So they kind of worked hand in hand and worked as a nice launch pad. Yeah, it was a really fun experience. It was one of those things for me. It was very much a balancing act of like, how close do you want to hew to the main Moon Knight run, knowing how fantastic it is, knowing how well received it is, but also knowing it's a very different voice than mine, and you don't want to, if you've got a chance to go at bat, I don't want to spend that time trying to imitate somebody else.
Yeah.
That feels cheap for both sides. So I was figuring out, what elements do I keep and what elements can I tweak or add or kind of make my own, which is why I turned it into sort of a supernatural noir story, where we have the running monologue from Mark, really kind of getting into his head and really exploring this through line of guilt and trauma and how do you overcome that? And I think that is a theme that I've approached many times in my work. I think that's something I always tend to gravitate towards. And yeah, Mark Spector really is a perfect character for that. And being able to write a love letter to his history, especially how he comes to terms with the blood that's on his hands, and can he forgive himself from that? That was just a really fun emotional core to play around with, and being able to throw in the supernatural Egyptian elements as well. It was just icing on the cake, really.
I mean, it's just Moon Knight's just such fun a character to write as it seems, because it's like you could
Yeah,
go so many different directions, like the supernatural, what you did, or if you want to keep it grounded, very street level, you can do that too.
yeah. He really has a lot of different facets to him,
Mhm.
and I think that's something that Jed has really played up beautifully in his run, is being able to take this multifaceted character who for so many years everyone just wrote off as, oh, it's Egyptian Batman, which couldn't be further from the truth.
Mhm.
But I think Jed really kind of was able to tackle, the different suits, and then revisiting the altars, and building up his base with the Midnight Mission and a supporting cast, and really kind of always focusing it on the mission of protecting the Travelers of the Night, which is really the thing that gravitates to me the most. That I think makes Moon Knight a hero, despite the fact that he's killed people, despite the fact that he was a mercenary, that he killed
Mhm.
people for money. The thing that makes him redeemable is that now he is trying to protect the little guy. He is, that he's trying to defend the defenseless. And he's trying to, in my mind, I always saw it as this guy was kind of a dirt bag, and then he was killed and brought back, and that was his second chance. And immediately coming off the table, he immediately puts on a cape, and he immediately starts, yeah, he's doing what he does best, which is violence, but he also, he's taking hits that he doesn't have to, but he feels like he has to in order to kind of balance the scales and make things right. And that I think is an interesting direction that's very different from any other sort of the Cape Crusaders that you might see elsewhere in comics. It's that this is a guy who, similar to Tony Stark, honestly.
Oh yeah.
He's got some baggage, and he's always carrying that baggage. And I think that is part of his emotional journey. Is can he ever forgive himself for it? And in lieu of that, how does he move forward?
I mean, I love so many characters where it's like, yeah, they're good. They've always been good. But I really find that interesting where, you have a character who's been able to, see their ways, do a 180 and, become a hero and
Yeah,
just change their whole life.
yeah, absolutely.
That is interesting. All right. So, okay, not to, all right. I'm going to try not to spoil too much, kids, but, okay. Mark's brother Randall is in this, series.
Hmm.
Is Randall his is Randall his greatest enemy, his own brother, or is it Bushman? I mean, when you cut a guy's face off, that's kind of personal. But I'm just,
Well,
who do you think
I would.
Moon Knight's greatest enemy is?
Well, the cliche, but I think it's actually the correct answer. I mean, Mark's his own worst enemy. Mark is always his own worst
Mm.
enemy because he's the enemy that he always carries with him, and
Oh,
he always has a problem stepping out of his own way. And he tends to. He's already a difficult person to like in general, but he always tends to find ways to like rub people, even the closest people around him. He rubs them the wrong way, and there is, I think, a degree of self-sabotage. But yeah, I think the cool thing about Moon Knight villains, taking away the canned answer here, it really is a Rorschach test. I grew up. For me, Jeff Wild Midnight is my favorite Moon Knight villain, and I think it comes down to, as I'm sure many comic fans are. What do they say about patriotism is the love of food that you had as a child. And so for me, my introduction to Moon Knight was in Amazing Spider-Man, in the round robin event, I guess,
yes.
or storyline. And so for me, I was like, oh yeah, he's this like cool, badass cyborg who he's being experimented on by the secret empire, and he's still tortured by these people, but he falls in love with his nurse who also happens to be a cyborg. So I'm a big fan. Whereas Randall, for me, he always struck me as raw material that hadn't quite been fully explored. He's come and gone in waves. From his original appearances, like as the Hatchet Man, to his demise in Shadowland, which was around. I've read comics nonstop since I was a kid, but it would always I would increase and decrease in waves.
Yeah.
And I think I spent a long time in the comics journalism trenches. I was at Newsarama for a better part of a decade, and so Shadowland was right around when I started in that area. It was Shadowland and Dark Reign. So it was all the stuff immediately after Secret Invasion. I think I was my first industry internship was during Secret Invasion. I was at DC at the time, and so yeah, I read all those Shadowland books, and so I was like, oh, Mark has a brother who they hate each other, and then Mark kills him, and it clearly causes profound mental anguish in Mark because that's when his alters come back. I think so seeing Jed had kind of loosened that raw material over on his run on Strange and really kind of focused this guy's dead, this guy's a revenant. And I was like, great, perfect. You've absolutely springboarded him back in. And so we can really kind of focus on the parallels of Mark Spector. The impetus for this mission, for his journey into the City of the Dead, is Mark is trying to rescue this kid Khalil, who he's a young runaway. He's been attacked outside the Midnight Mission and left for dead. And while he's in a coma in a ventilator, Mark detaches his soul and journeys to the City of the Dead. And without spoiling too much, I think it's because Mark recognizes, oh, I failed my own kid brother. And that is one of many, many scars that he carries with him. But I think that one, obviously, it's one thing to feel bad about Bushman, who he's known was kind of a scumbag, from the jump. Knew he was not a guy that, he would like. It was sort of an arrangement of maybe mutual respect in terms of each other's combat abilities, but I don't think he ever loved Bushman. His own brother, that's a tragedy. And seeing the way that their relationship ended in Shadowland is sort of the ultimate bad ending of that relationship. And so being able to kind of look back on that and look back at all of Moon Knight's past transgressions with all the villains that he's killed and all the people he's let down, including Layla, it felt like the perfect villain for this book. Somebody who's known Mark since the beginning, and of course has a very bad view of Mark. He feels hurt. He feels betrayed. Dying at your own brother's hands. That's something that if you believe in an afterlife, that's something you probably would carry with you. And so, yeah, being able to explore that was really fun. I also do have a soft spot for Chainsaw. Rounded out our Legion of the Unliving. You know, it was one of those things. I was looking up all the villains that Moon Knight has killed in the past. There were a few others that we didn't get in there. I know there was somebody in the Death of Doctor Strange that Mark killed, but the person was never actually on camera or never on panel. So like, it was like some sort of magical imp that I was just like, okay, we're not going to worry about him right now. And I know like we had talked about Stained Glass Scarlet, we had talked about Vermin, but it was kind of like those are sort of in a wobbly state. You know, those could be they're out doing their own thing, so we're not going to count them. But I was like, I need one more person. You know, we had Taurus, we had Plasma, who they both died on panel. Black Spectre, obviously, who was memorably pushed off a building. Midnight. I mean, Charlie Huston really was killing villains left and right. I guess I owe him a lot. But for me, one of the first Moon Knight stories I ever read outside of the round robin storyline, it was the end of a two-parter or a three-parter in Marvel Comics Presents, and it was the last appearance of Chainsaw, which I did not know. But it's Mark is trying to rescue I think a kidnapped kid. He tends to do that. And he winds up fighting like a group of bikers, and Chainsaw is there, and he kind of he tricks Chainsaw into like slicing down like a bunch of support beams, I think, and a bunch of shipping containers, I think, or the ceiling like caves in on Chainsaw, and that was the last time we ever saw Chainsaw. So that was like a cool little bit of playing God in the Marvel universe. I was like, that guy's dead now. And so, I love that goofy dude. And it was fun kind of getting to write him as like this very weird Leatherface kind of dude who thinks that he's got a shot with Plasma as the only woman on in the Legion of the Living. And she's like, not if you were the last freak show on Earth, man. Fun group. Just in general. I love obscure Marvel villains. They're fun to unearth. I actually did it similarly with the Night Shift over on Punisher this week.
I was gonna say that's a good segue, yeah, because
Yeah.
I love people like you who are fans of old stuff. Yeah, I've been reading since I was a kid too, and it's just bringing back all these old concepts. I saw Night Shift.
My mission is to come up with my own lineup of every single obscure Marvel supervillain team. So far, I've done
Mr. Hyde. I mean, not that he's obscure, but Mr. Hyde in the first issue.
We're bringing back Fearmaster in issue 3. She's only appeared in 2 issues of.
Yes, you know what? I'm glad you brought that up. Me and one of my co-hosts, Lilith, we talk to DG Chichester once a month, and he's the one who told me. He's like, "Oh yeah," he's like, "David's bringing it back in the new Punisher book," and I was like, "Oh my god, yes!" I'm like, if I wasn't gonna read this before, I'm definitely reading this now. Yes.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, I feel like I can really count on one hand the number of Marvel characters that I have chosen not to do anything with, that like I couldn't find an angle for. And even those, those characters are often they're very rooted in one particular run or one particular creative voice. And so like, but I think really, 99.99999% of Marvel characters, there's no bad Marvel characters. And the thing that I've found is that these characters actually gain legitimacy the more creators use them. So I think you can introduce a character, but it's ultimately comes down to like, will somebody else take the baton? And I think that's really kind of I think something that a lot of people don't realize about working in a shared universe is that like if you want something to gain traction, it really is just a matter of how many different hands can you pass it into, so that it sort of becomes accepted canon, so to speak.
Oh yeah, I like I said, I love it, and I think that's a sign of a good writer. Is like when you take the stuff that's come before and you can like mold it into your pattern. And I'm such an old school reader. I love that stuff. Yeah.
I mean, it's just it really does. It takes a lot of the. I think that's where a lot of the journalism training comes in. Is you're kind of doing a little bit of digging, and also it feels a little like archaeology in that you have this raw material, and the cool thing is especially with these characters that are a little more obscure, you're really able to kind of put your own stamp on them. you're able to do something unique and interesting with them. Especially we did it a lot with the Night Shift, where there was a lot of recontextualization, particularly with like a character like Bushwhacker. Where we're able to kind of add some new wrinkles, or introducing like an all new Doughboy to the mix.
Yes,
So,
Doughboy.
yeah, Doughboy. I recognize that the original Doughboy, was just a synthetic creature,
Mm.
by Arnim Zola. But I was kind of like, well, that would just be a cool character to like actually make like a human being. And so we had done it as sort of you know really kind of just a malcontent who happened to stumble upon like Doughboy plans on like the dark web, and was like, oh, I'm going to break into my dad's biolab. I can do that. And, just turns himself into Doughboy so he can get revenge on everybody, whoever made fun of him in school. It's just, the Marvel universe, it's a fun place to play in. It's such a vibrant and diverse tapestry. And so, I'll write there for 100 years if they let me. It's just, it's impossible to run out of ideas there. There's
All
just
right.
so much material.
I don't know if you can answer this, but yes, I love all the villains. But are we going to see any Marvel heroes making any appearances in these pages?
Um, you know, um, TBD. I would like to, down the line. I mean, right now, my central focus is, right now it's on Joe's origin.
Yes.
That's sort of that's what we've completed so far, is Joe's origin story. And I would love to do some more. I mean, I definitely feel like a character like Peter Parker would
Mm,
probably have some pretty strong opinions about somebody showing up as a, you know, uh, uh, being dubbed the Punisher, um, or Daredevil.
mhm.
There are a few others, that I think would be interesting. But yeah, for now, the thing is especially for Joe's origin story, I really wanted to make sure that he could stand on his own 2 feet. We had
Yes.
talked about actually including, other characters, in that first arc, and I was like, it feels cheap, because then it almost feels like the experiment is tainted, where it feels like, oh well, like this guy couldn't stand on his own 2 feet for 4 issues before he had to bring in like Wolverine, or he had to bring in Spider-Man. So definitely, I would love to do that. Right now we're focusing on just landing the plane, for the origin. And then we're switching editorial offices, after that first arc is done, sort of as sort of the general change ups, in a post Krakoa world. Um,
Mm.
and so, yes, we're discussing all of it. Sort of what's going to happen after that origin arc. But yeah, I would love to. I think Spider-Man especially feels like a really good, little bit of synchronicity. Since the Punisher
Oh
got his
yeah,
start as
yeah.
a Spider-Man villain, I think it feels inevitable that would come full circle. But
Mhm.
maybe having Daredevil in the mix
Mm.
might be interesting as well. So I don't know. TBD. We'll have to find out.
All right. And I'm glad you brought up the origin. I wanted to ask you, I mean, what kind of task was that like? Where it's like you're reimagining the concept with a new guy. So it's like,
Yeah,
how
it
was
was.
that like? Where it's like, I want to keep certain aspects, but I don't want to make him a Frank Castle clone. So it's like,
Yeah. Well, it was one of those things. We talked at length about that. The creation of Joe Garrison. Honestly, that was more development time that I've spent on any project in Marvel. At least double, what I've typically done, because it's all the tricky elements of operating in a shared universe, where you have to kind of navigate the traffic flow and figuring out like, oh, okay, this character's in use elsewhere, so we can't use them, but also all the tricky parts of a creator-owned thing, where you don't really have continuity to lean back on. You are building the bedrock right then and
yeah.
there. And so, the thing that Tom Brevoort, my editor, and I we talked at length about was, less is more. It's one of those things. Uh, if you reinvent the wheel too much, you don't have a wheel anymore. You have like a square. This is trying to make, as Tom put it, a wheel, a different wheel that is just as sturdy as the original wheel. And so simplicity is really kind of the name of the game. Frank Castle, you can really kind of just rattle off his origin in the blink of an eye. Man goes on crusade against crime after his family is gunned down by gangsters.
Mm-hmm.
And so we wanted to do something similar for Joe, which is, ex-Shield hitman, is framed for his family's murder and hunts down the true culprits. John Wick meets the fugitive. And so, I think for me, it was kind of like, all right, how do we, we talked a lot about when we announced it as the Danny Ketch to Frank's Johnny Blaze. But I think actually in the development, I really looked a lot at Robbie Reyes as Ghost Rider. For those who remember that character, Robbie sort of was able to pivot from motorcycle culture to muscle cars, and something that still felt like a Ghost Rider, but had very much carved out his own niche. And so that was something I really wanted to do with Joe. I knew there was going to be so much scrutiny behind the character. There was going to be a lot of people saying, oh, is this a person who could go toe to toe with Frank Castle? There's going to be a lot of comparison. And so, it was sort of, okay, how do we give him a background that he could conceivably go toe to toe with somebody like Frank? And so having him as the ex-Shield agent, that way it's separate enough. You're not doing a comparison versus Marines versus Air Force versus, Army, which any that would be a pitfall with any real world group.
Yeah.
This is okay. It's Shield. It's sort of its own thing. He was sort of the John Wick of Shield, the Wet Works guy. He was so secret that we haven't seen him until this point, and it's also because he's retired. But for me, it was it's the gun fu Punisher. Rather than be the guy who's like all about the specific hardware. Which we've seen. I mean, there was literally a series in the 90s, Punisher Armory, which was it was basically an illustrated guns and ammo catalog. Rather than kind of focus on that, it's really about the choreography of it all. And so while we are able to kind of elevate Joe's arsenal and give him some weapons of his own, you saw like the railgun in issue 1, for example, which they're basically just like electromagnetic rounds that are fired at high speed. But it's also just about the choreography. It's how does he move his way through a crowd? How does he use the environment around him? I talked with Dave Wachter, our artist on the book, saying, we should be able to drop Joe in any location, and half the fun is just watching, like, how does he get his way out? How does he fight his way out, especially using all the stuff around him? And so, we saw that a lot in issue 2, with the night shift this week. And we'll be seeing more of that in issues 3 and 4 coming out soon. And I thought that was kind of a unique way for him to set himself apart from Frank, is that Frank, Frank always struck me as a wrecking ball of a character. He is the hammer, and that's why he's endured for so long. Is like it's really satisfying watching somebody get hit with a hammer. Joe really is. He's the scalpel. He is sort of, instead of going for the big explosive moments, although he does of course have some. It's really about like very short, sharp cuts, and making these occasional impossible shots, or kind of the way that he goes toe to toe with somebody like Finesse, for example, or the Inner Demons. That was really fun, and I think kind of speaks to a particular cultural touchstone that didn't come out, that wasn't a thing back in the days of Frank Castle's inception. Now we have, it's like a whole genre of film, the gun fu films, where you have, and Keanu Reeves is kind of the pioneer of it, where you have it with John Wick, and you have it with Bullet Train, and you have it with Atomic Blonde, and you have it with director Chad Stahelski, I think is how you pronounce his last name, and his whole cohort. And so I had said, Marvel doesn't have a John Wick. Now they do. So it's been a really fun series, and I owe so much to Dave Wachter on this, because he really understood the assignment. When I talked with him about the book, I had said, I want to look at things like ACO's run on Midnighter. I want to look at Damian Scott's run on Batgirl, Scott McDaniel's run on Nightwing, to kind of develop our own unique visual language for Joe and in the way that we lay out our panels. And also looking at the John Wick movies and looking at stuff like in that sort of general cohort. And I think Dave really synthesized that in such a cool way. And so, him teaming up with Dan Brown, our colorist, I do think Punisher is one of the best looking books of Marvel right now. So
Oh yeah,
very fortunate, lucky to work with them.
Oh yeah, beautiful book, and yeah, I love that difference. Yeah, it's just Joe's like more probably say cerebral than Frank, and I mean that's how Marvel needs to promote this book. Oh, Marvel has their John Wick. Come on, internet, spread that around.
Well, I know we mentioned it. We mentioned it in the first issue solicits, and yeah, I'll talk about that anytime anybody asks. It really is. If you're a fan of John Wick, I think you'll like this book. It really is. John Wick Beats the Fugitive. It's just about a guy trying to figure out what the hell happened to his family. And in the course of doing so, how does his personal vendetta go wide into a larger, more self-sustaining mission? Without spoiling anything about the book, so many people asked when we announced, well, why would this guy call himself the Punisher? And that was a question I asked myself a lot as we were developing it. And then I realized that's the theme of the book. That's the arc of the book, is how does a guy go from my family's dead, I need answers, I need closure, I need revenge, to I'm the Punisher now. And how does he come to that decision? And how does he approach the mission differently than any other Punishers that have come before or since? I have written Jake Gallows, the Punisher of 2099. And I guess that's the only response I might have is I of course I've seen people say, oh, there's only one Punisher and his name's Frank Castle. And my opinion on that is I think you missed the train like 30 years ago. With Jake Gallows, that's a legacy that lasts into the year 2099. So we've got another almost 75 years to look forward to, knock on wood. You have people like Lynn Michaels or Rachel Cole Alvis or Outlaw. I do think, of course, like they are all inspired or connected somehow spiritually to the original. But I do think that it's interesting to kind of turn the Punisher's mission into a little bit of a Rorschach test, where everybody's origin is rooted in that same core tragedy, that it's the death of a family. A canon event, if it were as you were, if you saw Across the Spider-Verse, and then how does that same kind of core origin, how do you spiral off in very different directions from that? And that's something that I really hope that we get to dig into with Joe in the future, because I've got a lot of ideas for him. Ultimately, I would like to see him as a Punisher for the people. He's a Punisher for the little guy. I had a conversation with a Punisher fan at Baltimore Comic-Con, and he had like the whole ensemble. He had a Punisher t-shirt, a Punisher hat, a Punisher coffee mug. And I remember, he had heard about the new Punisher, and I think he was understandably very protective of Frank Castle. And I think he was expecting like a huge departure. And I asked him instead, I said, do you ever feel like the system is just like hopelessly rigged against the little guy? And I think he was like very taken aback, because I do think that is a question that I think there is bipartisan agreement on. And that's sort of when Jerry Conway came up with the Punisher, he had always said it was an indictment of society. Like there's something wrong in a society that would spawn somebody like the Punisher. And back then it was all, that was in the zeitgeist of Death Wish. And, when the original miniseries came out, Bernard Getz was on trial for being the subway vigilante. And there was all this talk about, society having gone astray. Does it have anything to do, in this case, they were talking about due process, and is the law's hands tied? And I think the way the conversation has shifted since then, it's, the whole system feels rigged against the little guy. People are falling through the cracks. There's no social safety net. Everybody kind of feels like they're on their own, and that the law won't help them. Not even can't, but won't. And I think that is really fertile soil for a new Punisher. The law can't or won't help you. Maybe this is the guy who will help you settle the score.
Oh,
So
okay.
that's really where I want Joe to be. And I think once he is sort of firmly embraced this new role as the Punisher, I think that is a through line that could sustain him for for years. And I certainly have a laundry list of stories that I can tell in that vein. And so yeah, I'm hoping I get to tell those stories. And but yeah, I think it's a lot of fun to this character, and I think there's a lot that can be told with him. And so yeah, this first story is really just how do we get Joe to become the Punisher, and then
Okay.
we're off to the races after that.
All right. I was looking at the questions I got sent. I think we answered the first one about keeping whatever you wanted from Frank and then adding new stuff with Joe. But I think it's perfect where we're at now. That's the second one. How far out do you have this plotted out? And how far? I'm sure if I say how long do you want to stay, you'll probably be like forever. So
I'll
yeah,
say,
how far
yeah.
ahead do you have this planned out?
So we've got the first 4 issues done, written, plotted, and that will cover Joe's origin. And then yeah, beyond that, I've got. I think I've written down, I think, a good dozen ideas. I mean, I think something that I would really like to do with Joe as a character, and I've seen it done with a lot of success over in Ryan North's Fantastic Four. Even going back to like Warren Ellis's run on Moon Knight, which is a very seminal run for me, certainly made me fall in love with the character. Is I would like to do a lot more done in ones or done in twos. Really kind of save those stories that are larger. If you want something to be a 2-parter, that means this has got to be a big deal character. Or if you do a 3-parter, like what kind of scale of a story will require 3 parts. And so that's something I've been the pacing that I've done for these first 2 issues of Punisher and will continue to do for the back half of this arc. That's what I would like to do for the character long term. I want to give readers a lot of bang for their buck. I know how expensive comics are, and I know that you have a lot of other things competing for your time, attention, and money. And so for me, I want to make sure that if you get a book, even if it's building towards something bigger, you get a satisfying chunk with each monthly release. And that's something that I wanted to do with Savage Avengers. That's something that I wanted to do even in my creator-owned book, is that every issue is like, oh, this is the issue where there's a car chase, or this is the issue where he's in a crocodile's stomach, embracing his ghosts. This is the issue where he fights his way up a building fighting a bunch of supervillains. But I think there are ways that you can do it that are even tighter than that. And so that's something, Punisher really is kind of like the prototype of the way that I would like to start structuring some of my superhero stories. And it's not to say that it's a one-size-fits-all approach, but I think especially for a character like Joe, putting him through his paces as quickly as possible, I think it really kind of helps bolster him as a character. And I think will also kind of give more and more opportunities to learn more and more about who he is behind that skull, and behind that mask of stoicism. Who is that shield agent, that ex-shield agent? And the more we get to see him, I think the more we'll get to know him.
Yeah, no, the pacing on this is great because we are getting information about Joe, but meanwhile, there's not time to get bored because there is action kills. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not like the Punisher. I've never really seen it as like a subtle man's book.
No.
Seeing that skull on his chest. I don't think he's ever been one for subtlety. And so yeah, kind of just doing the cool action stuff. And I think that is what has really won over a lot of readers. I think there were a lot of people who were skeptical about introducing a new Punisher. They thought that it would either be a huge departure from what the core concept of the Punisher, or they thought it would be some sort of betrayal or indictment of what's come before. And my thinking is, uh, I don't I don't think you're a bad person if you like Frank Castle. I mean, I pitched Frank Castle in Savage Avengers, and that's how I found out that he was joining the Hand. And then I pitched Rachel Cole Alvis, and I couldn't fit her. And then I finally pitched Jake Gallows and did something I think pretty cool with him, and that's
Hmm.
what got me this gig. Like I like the Punisher. I think it's a cool character. I think there's a lot of cool stuff that can be done. That circling back to something I said earlier, when you don't have superpowers to lean on, you got to lean on your grit and you lean on your wit.
Hmm.
Um, and so it's a fun character. And I think when people actually read that first issue and then read the second one, are like, oh, this actually reads kind of like an old school Punisher comic. I consider that to be a high compliment. And so, yeah, for me, I don't subscribe to this notion that like, oh, well, you got to tell a Punisher story at the expense of either the hardcore fans or the expense of anybody who hasn't read the book before. I feel like there's always room for a bigger table. And that's something that I think this new jumping on point, I want to invite as many people to the table as possible, because it's a fun book, and
Yeah.
I want to share the fun.
And it's a great jumping on point. It's like if you've never read a Punisher book, you can read this. Everything you need
Yeah,
to know pretty much is in these in two issues out so far. So,
yeah,
oh, can I tell you my favorite moment? Issue one when he's
please.
when who is that? Is it double A or triple?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. She's like, "Oh, that's Mr. Hyde. He's gone toe to toe with Thor." And Joe pulls out that gun and says, "Oh, I guess I got better bring the thunder then." And pulls out.
it was fun. Yeah, Hyde's a super fun villain. I mean, the cool thing about Punisher, that I had a lot of fun with, and Dave Wachter did such a great job, is
Oh yeah,
especially because we're dealing with characters that are not exactly household names, and that's because like one of the first things I thought about was the central paradox of the Punisher is the Punisher doesn't really have a rogues gallery,
yeah,
and I wonder why that is. Uh, because the Punisher traditionally puts a bullet in your head. Like you do not get up for round two unless it's like Jigsaw.
yeah. Well, that's what I have always said. It's like I think it works better with Joe now because since he's so new, so you can say, okay, this is why. And again, he's maybe not killing everyone in sight. With Frank Castle could never be 100% competent because yeah, he could kill a bunch of new villains we never heard of before, but he's not going to kill Wilson Fisk because
Right, right, because you need Wilson Fisk. Yeah,
yes,
exactly. It sort of rubs up against the suspension of disbelief.
yeah,
It's like you can't kill Kingpin because like other
no,
people are going to need Kingpin. And so for Joe, and I think it's a core part of who he is as well, is that when you met Frank Castle in an Amazing Spider-Man 129, I think it
yeah,
was, he's already the Punisher. He's already made that decision. He's already marinated in his family's death for quite some time. He's clearly got a body count already as the Punisher. This was not his first rodeo. Whereas, like for Joe, we're following him in real time,
yeah.
essentially. He just lost his family. He clearly hasn't even made the decision to be called the Punisher yet. We have an issue too. The offer's like, "Oh, you're the Punisher," and he's like, "That's what they keep calling me." Like Joe his thinking is like, if it keeps him looking in the wrong direction, I don't care. Let them
Mhm.
call. So for Joe, he's refining his pattern a bit. He's sometimes he's going to let people live because sometimes there are punishments worse than death.
Mm.
Sometimes you could just leave somebody in horrible traction, and they have to think about it and they have to live with it.
Like the offer, yes.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. He's also, he's got a code of honor. In this case, he promised the offer he'd let him live if he got him information, and he did.
It's like
Uh,
you're still breathing.
yeah, the monkey's paw curls. Um, but the cool thing about these villains is because so many of them are so obscure, we were really able to kind of recontextualize them in some fun ways. Like I know with Hyde, I talked with Dave. I was like, what if we did like Guy Ritchie's Hyde? Like because I
Mhm.
think the Victorian costume was always kind of a turnoff for me. Like I understand it is a product of its time. Like it felt
Yeah.
almost silver agey in a way. But like as a reader, I couldn't take him as a threat. because I was just like, oh, he's got, the spectacle and he's got the tailed suit. So I was like, oh, if we did like the Guy Ritchie version where he's like, like the dirty tough guy, European version of Hyde, I was like, oh, okay, that's cool, that makes sense. Or like the this kind of paramilitary look on Bushwhacker, which that was Dave's idea, but I was really kind of like, all right, like let's introduce some, let's play up the threads that Al Ewing left in Bushwhacker's appearances in Immortal Hulk, where he's got the chainsaw arms, and he's got he's coming up with his arm can turn into like a sniper rifle or a shotgun, and he's got all these different types of ammo. And when I was reading that, I was like, you know what that reminds me of? Extremis.
Oh yes.
And so we got to kind of slip that in.
Yeah.
Is that like that Bushwhacker's unit was a precursor to like the final Extremis serum, and I was like, I was biting my nails the whole time, thinking, being like, oh, they're gonna make me take it out, they're not gonna like it, and then it's canon now. Nobody can stop me. So that was like a fun little bit. Or
I mean, okay, it's a spoiler, kids, but again, you're gonna love this. I mean, you have him drop a piano on.
Yeah, like I was kind of like, listen, we're going, like, it was the last bit of the issue that I had put together, because I knew how Eel was going to get taken out. I knew how Doughboy and Finesse were like the first two I figured out, and Eel I figured out pretty quickly. And I was like, Bushwhacker, what am I going to do with this guy? And I was like, the action is so over the top that I was like, oh, let's go Looney Tunes with this thing, man. Like, just drop a piano on his head. And so, yeah, it was a lot of fun with that. Finesse, I can't believe how many people are so excited that Finesse is back. I got half a mind to try to like pitch Champions or something. Like, I would love to write the Champions. Anybody who read Savage Avengers knows I'm a huge Miles Morales fan. And also all the teen heroes at Marvel are just spectacular, and I would love to do something with that. But anyway, I digress. I wrote her. My goal was I wanted to write her a little like an onomatopoeia, who was just showing up actually in Green Arrow coming up. But I was kind of like, oh, I like the idea of this character who like, the way that she sees the world is just different, because she's Taskmaster's daughter. And I believe Christos Gage had actually made it canon that like she was on the spectrum. And so being able to kind of have her explore the world that way, I thought was like a really cool way to have her stand out, and a really cool way to really reflect who she is as a character, as well as the way that she like sees the world and navigates the world, because she's somebody who can literally go toe to toe with the Punisher. She beats the hell out of Joe, and the only way that Joe wins is he cheats. But also I think we had some of my favorite lines in the whole series in that fight with Finesse, where she's like, Punisher's supposed to have dark hair. Or Joe being like, kids these days, no respect for the classics. Like, yes, I read Twitter, I understand. So yeah, it was a lot of fun writing the Night Shift, getting to revisit The Offer. I actually, that was not a creation of mine. The Offer, for those who might remember, he was in Paul Cornell's run on Wolverine. And so I actually got to meet Paul at San Diego Comic-Con this summer. And I got to tell him like, hey man, like we're bringing back The Offer. And he was just so lovely and gracious about it. And I got to say, that has been a really cool, unexpected side effect of working on this series, is getting to meet all these creators whose work I grew up enjoying and grew up loving. Stephen Grant, I met him. He's a big fan of Black Knight. And I wrote Black Knight and Savage Avengers, and so we kind of hit it off over Twitter over that. And then I didn't realize like he was the one who like created the different alters for Moon Knight. And then obviously the writer of the first Punisher miniseries. And so I met him in person at that same San Diego. It was right before we announced Punisher, and I was so nervous, and I was like Steve, I don't want you to be mad at me. But you know, we're introducing a brand new Punisher, and he was very he's a sweetheart, although he'll try not to show it. But he was like, oh yeah, I heard, I have my sources. And so the fact that he gave the book his blessing,
Oh,
um,
nice.
you know, the guy who was so responsible for all of this, um, it was really a wonderful moment, really affirming. And I think that's the thing that often gets overlooked. And I feel like you know, we've been seeing a lot of on comics Twitter just over the course of the last week or so, is that I think oftentimes people are very quick to think that comic creators don't like the work or the characters that they're working on, which couldn't be further from the truth. I feel like this job is the best job I've ever had, but also like the most challenging and exhausting and heartbreaking job I've ever had. But I do it because I love the job. I love the characters. I love the act of making comics. I love interacting with fans. And I think having creators lifting each other up and supporting each other, even when they're rolling the dice, even when they're taking a risk. That's the lifeblood of this industry. Is trying new things, seeing what sticks, and I think I know there's always an impulse to say, well, this was great when in the 90s or in the late 2000s, early 2010s, which is when I was kind of coming up. I totally get it. Um, but if we don't try anything new, you're never going to get the 90s X-Men. You're never going to get the Winter Soldier. You're never going to get Dark Reign or Krakoa or any of these things that everybody loves.
Miles Morales. Yeah.
Miles Morales. You know, you're never going to get a cool little run of Misfit toys on the Savage Avengers. So you know, it's one of those things that interacting with these creators who have been so supportive and being able to take, in the cases of like Paul and DG, just like taking their obscure characters and like doing something new with them. That's what keeps the industry fresh, and that's what keeps
Oh,
it interesting. And so, yeah, yeah, but we all do it for love of the game is really kind of the long way around, and seeing that that's something that doesn't change, seeing that that's something that is generational, that you don't do this business without loving it.
oh
Um,
yeah.
yeah,
I've talked to so many comic creators. Yeah, I can see the love people have for this. And I mean, I'm thrilled, just talking to people like
yeah,
creators like you or even people like DG Chichester, who I was
yeah.
reading his Daredevil run 30 years ago. It's like I can't imagine your position where you get to play with the toys.
It's, you know, I still pinch myself all the time for it, and I try to be worthy of it. But yeah, it's just it's an incredible experience, an incredible opportunity, and we're just trying to do right by the fans. We're trying to kind of deliver something new and cool and interesting, and you know, we're all burning the midnight oil to entertain, and so yeah, just being able to have the support of those creators that have come before, and have the support of all the fans who, many of whom, they were like, I don't know about this, and they rolled the dice on the book, and they wound up walking away being like, hey, I actually like this book. And you know, you kind of see it everywhere. Everywhere that anyone's talking about this book, there are of course the diehards who say, well, I have I have one idea of what I want the Punisher to be, and if it's not that, I don't like it. But there have been just as many people who are like, you know, I wasn't expecting anything out of this book. I actually really enjoy it.
Mm.
And you know, I guess that's my superpower, is subverting people's expectations. Um, you know, and yeah, you know, I can't tell you, my first book, you know, Spencer and Locke, everybody was like, I don't know about this book, and then they read it and it got nominated for 5 Ringo Awards. So you know, I appreciate everybody who's given us a shot and given me a shot, and yeah, we're working hard to be worthy of it.
Again, kids, read the first 2 issues. You will be sold. Especially
Thank
if
you.
you love, like we said, if you love John Wick, you'll love this.
Yeah,
Love this book.
exactly.
Basically, John Wick in the Marvel universe.
Yep.
All right, before I let you go, I have one question I try to ask all the creators. All right,
Hit me.
is there any character you've never written in any way, shape, or form that you're like, I would just love to write that crap out of that character?
Yeah, there are a few. Doctor Strange.
Mm.
He's like my bucket list Marvel guy. Um, Wolverine would be fun.
Mm.
Nightcrawler would be fun. Gambit could be fun. Over the DC side of the fence, I haven't done anything at DC yet. Superman, Shazam, The Flash, Batman. Those would all be fun. I like team books. That's the thing, is that like I would be so excited to write another team book. And I'm writing something right now that's a little more ensemble, but even that doesn't feel like a full team book. I guess you'll hear more about that next year. Yeah, I would like.
I mean, half your bucket list sounds like X-Men, so it sounds like you're hankering for an X book.
I would love to. I would love to do something in that world. But yeah, I mean, honestly, it just getting to play, in the Marvel universe. It's a thrill. I'm grateful for any assignments I'm working on, and yeah, it's just been. It really does feel like playing for the Yankees. You're working with some of just the most extraordinary talents in the industry, and you're all kind of working together on a common goal, and you're working together quickly, and yeah, it's just it's difficult to describe. It feels like climbing Everest, and I'm just I'm grateful to be here, and yeah, it really is. It's the thrill of a lifetime.
And you're going to be the guy who goes down in history as creating the new Punisher.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Mark that on my tombstone.
That's what I would say. I'd be like, yeah, put that on my tombstone. All right, David, thank you so much for your time. Anytime you want to come back, promote anything, please do. Hell, I'll be like anytime a Punisher issue comes out, if you want to come back, we'll talk about it. I don't care.
Sure. Well, no, man, I really appreciate you having me on. Thank you so much for reading and for taking the time to chat and ask such thoughtful questions. And yeah, for everybody watching, thank you so much for your support. Thank you so much for coming by. And yeah, stay tuned. I'd love to write Punisher for as long as the market will allow, as long as Marvel wants me. And so yeah, stick around. We got some fun stuff planned.
Oh, nice. And then on a purely selfish level, can I get a quick drop of you saying, hi, this is David Pepose, and you're listening to the Capes and Lunatics podcast?
Yeah. Hi, I'm David Pepose, and you're listening to the Capes and Lunatics podcast.
Perfect. Thank you, sir.
Done in one.
All right. But so besides Punisher, is there anything else you have going on right now you want to promote?
Yeah. So we just wrapped up. Yeah, we just wrapped up on my Moon Knight miniseries, Moon Knight City of the Dead. So you can pre-order the trade paperback through your local comic shop. That'll be coming out in February. But you can also get all 5 issues in singles. They should all still be there. I also have a horror series that's coming out, The Devil That Wears My Face, through Mad Cave Studios. It's Face Off meets The Exorcist, about a Vatican priest who, after an exorcism gone wrong, winds up being trapped in the body of a possessed victim, while a demon has taken over his body and goes back to the Vatican to wreak havoc. So yeah, if you like Face Off, The Exorcist, The Count of Monte Cristo, it's a really fun book. I'm working with Alex Cormack on art, and he just he's one of the most talented horror artists of his generation. So ask your local comic shop. Issue 3 of Devil That Wears My Face just came out this week. So that is right at the midway point. So you do not have much to catch up on, but super fun horror book. So definitely check that out along with Punisher.
Oh, all right. Thank you. Like I said, you're a friend of the show now. Anytime you want to come back on, yeah, please. You have my email. Just
thank you. I appreciate it.
We need to chat. We need to chat again. Again, kids, go buy the Punisher. It's good.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and I really appreciate it. Keep reading.
Yes. Thank you, sir. All right, kids.